My mentor in residency used to love, whenever he spoke at virtually any occasion, to show a slide, and Dr. Simon will know this, of a turtle on a fence post. And the point he made was, when you see a turtle on a fence post, you know he didn't get there by himself. And what he meant was that those who come before us, whether we know them or whether they're so remote in the past that we never met them, they still shape things, whether it's culture or mores or whatever, that affects us and affects where we are and what we do today. So today really is a celebration of that. And who better to present that to us but Dr. Mike Simon, who, I don't know if he will share it in this, but I've seen it in other timelines for the department, something called the Simon era of orthopedics at University of Chicago, and it still goes on today. But I think you will see that for a small academic medical center and a small group of orthopedists, the national impact, and particularly the impact in creating leaders in orthopedics nationally, has been quite phenomenal. So Mike, please share with us.
You know, we say, and we actually, University of Chicago often says, we're teachers of teachers, and I added the word leaders, but they're two different characteristics. You know, you could be a good teacher, not a good leader. You could be a good leader, not such a good teacher. They're two different things. So these are the 5 eras. Sort of, we just gave this a placeholder. This is sort of prehistory. This is the era we're going to talk about. This is sort of the middle era, and this is the more contemporary era, would be Laros, myself, and Doug. And our objective is, we would like to substantiate that claim. You know, a lot of people can say things, they might be true, they might not be true, but so this is what we set out to do. Okay, so this slide is at least 20 years old. You can see it's really been copied from a carousel slide and then retyped. So this is, it's full of errors. It's my slide. I got about, I'd say 3 or 4 of these wrong. And I'll show you how we found that out. Okay, so the first thing we did was, these are 2, if you want to know about the University of Chicago in a global way, this monograph by Vermeulen goes from 27 to 77. And then there's a guy named McCarthy who wrote one mainly about surgery, but it was surgery orientated. So we're talking just about orthopedic surgery. As you remember, we weren't a department, so we weren't separated anywhere, and we have very little remnants of the history. So those were the 2 monographs primarily. And we have a conversation with Howard Hatcher. It was taped in 1976. Okay, so it was a tape, you know, a handheld tape. Dr. Hatcher is slow, methodical, and so it might be hard for you to stick with it, but I have the text with it. And then I actually visited him in 1980 and stayed at his house, and our day started with scotch and ended with scotch for 2 days, and I slept in his house. So that was the way it was. So we're gonna, and also we looked at some archives. Now, there's another character in here, another person named Ed Compier, and he actually preceded Howard Hatcher. So you all heard the word Howard Hatcher via me, but actually Ed, in many ways, was very productive. So if you notice, this is from, these are all the publications of Ed Compier from 30 to 39. So he had a little, and this are the publications of Howard Hatcher from 30 to 39. Howard Hatcher came here as a resident in 1930, so at age 30. He was born 1900 exactly. So you can see there are 2 different kinds of people. One is definitely younger than the other, but 2 different kinds of people. And this are pathology reports. Now, if you look in the back of that, the conference room E302, there's a stack of stuff. There are old slides and there's old path reports. And what's interesting is you go through them, I wanted to get a flavor of who was who and who overlapped with who. And one of the more interesting thing is, this is Dr. Hatcher. So he looked at every specimen, at least during this era. Just about every one. Here's Clint, not Clint, that's his younger brother, Ed Compier. He was a surgeon. He was pretty active, typical orthopedic surgeon at the time. What not typical is the diseases. Like this is a shoulder arthrodesis. Okay, and it was for polio. So probably most of you here have never seen a shoulder arthrodesis. Actually I have, but it was for tumor. So that's the kind of diseases they were taking care of. Then this is where Chris did a lot of work. We went and found all these university announcements from 1924 through 1980. Okay, so this is the whole surgery department, including all their residents in 1 year. So this year happens to be 45, okay? And if you look a little closer, below it is otolaryngology. So you can see there's, a little closer there. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 people here in all of orthopedics. And what are they called? Let's see, there's an associate professor, that's Howard Hatcher. There's an instructor who became chairman later on. There's Mary Sherman, an instructor. You can see what level we're talking about. And then this is Mike Bonfilio before he went to war. So this is it. And so he actually left next year. You can see he disappeared. Mary's still there. Robert is still there. This is a new guy, and that's another guy that made it for a year. So we had trouble because there were so many different names here, and they weren't really named residents all the time. There's assistant residents, there's a junior assistant resident, or a senior assistant resident, and by and large, we couldn't figure out how many residents and who are the residents very easily, so we had to start somewhere. So we just counted everyone that was on all these lists. Okay, so that's where we started. So we're back to here. So on the left-hand side, what you see is my original list. On the right-hand side is like the greater 41, I'll call them, or 47, I don't even remember the number. And the ones in orange, it is orange, yeah. Oops, sorry, it's the next one. I see what they did. So these are the ones in orange. So we got 41. This is 47, so-called universe of possible residents from 1928 to 1960. Okay, so there are some people you would know there or know of, and some you'd never heard of, including me. Anything in orange I've never heard of before. Didn't know what they did, didn't know how long they were there, didn't know what their rank was, didn't know if they were a resident or not. So I'm going to go backward and we'll get to the end at the end, okay? So you need a little historical background. The reason this place exists is really for John D. Rockefeller. He had probably the second most rich man in the United States, maybe Henry Ford. Probably not at that time, or a little after that was the richest, probably. And so he had piles of money, and the original president of the institution, Harper, anytime things went bad, he'd say, ask him for money, and he'd give it to it. So the Rockefeller's influence on our institution is very, very large. In fact, when I came here in the 70s, there's still one Rockefeller in the Board of Trustees, fourth generation. So you have to understand that, so this place was built really originally by Rockefeller. And this is another important thing to know, Flexner. Now, Abraham Flexner sort of was unflexible, But he really had a very important report. They're called the Flexner Report. It's a little over a decade ago. And he also had a lot of money. This is all Carnegie money. Okay, so you notice Canada on there, guys? Canada. So his job was to get rid of all the proprietary medical schools, which he did a good job at. And he had lots of money, okay? Lots of money, and had lots of ideas. So here's the ideas how they played out at the University of Chicago. Okay, so he made some recommendations. This is 1916, so just pre-World War I for us, but for Canada it was before, 1914, right? And so you can see where this was going. So he envisioned, and he had the money to back it up, he envisioned one campus here and one campus at Rush, which was already pre-existing, and then one postgraduate school at Rush. And then he said if we start our own school, we should develop the campus in Hyde Park. Okay, now here's a very key point. He envisioned full-time faculty paid by the university endowment. Now you can see how that was going to work out. Not very well, then or now. Okay, you can imagine that. So at this time, then, there were really 6 medical schools. Rush was the first. It was in the 1830s. It's Benjamin Rush's name, but it wasn't anything to do with Benjamin Rush. They sort of picked the name and called it that. He was a signer of the American Declaration of Independence. Sort of like Rosalind Franklin is sort of another name that's here for Chicago Medical School. She's long dead. And so, but they used the name. There was the University of Illinois, which was a very good school. They were all downtown, clustered, and Northwestern. Well, those 3 were all pretty big going concerns by the late 19th century. Loyola is right at the turn of the century, not this last century, but it's 2 centuries ago. Chicago Medical School survived Flexner and still is here today, and the University of Chicago. So see, we're the youngest school in the Chicago area. And so what also happened was you could go to University of Chicago undergrad, first 2 years of medical school, and you could go to Rush and get a Rush diploma, or you could stay here once we had a clinical operation and get a USC diploma. So at one time we actually sponsored, we meaning University of Chicago, had 2 medical schools, and actually, and 2 medical schools and 2 different diplomas during this 20-year period. So there's some, there's competing claims between Johns Hopkins and the University of Chicago about full-time faculty. There's no question that Johns Hopkins was the first full-time faculty. Okay, it was late 1800s when Johns Hopkins gave him the money. He actually gave him the money for a school and a college right at the same time. So that's a pretty close alignment. So what's different is that even when I was a medical student, Johns Hopkins, and when I was a medical resident at University of Chicago, had private patients taking care of the faculty. They were called. So when I was a resident, we only had 3 faculty. How did they get paid? Well, they got paid by taking care of private patients in the same institution, but on a different floor. Private wing versus a ward system. This is even in the late 70s. So this duality, and the same thing at Hopkins. Hopkins always had private patients. So guys like Osler or Halstead, yeah, they were full-time faculty, but they got private patients. Now remember, no one had medical insurance then. No Medicare, no medical insurance, a cash business. Okay? So there's some questions. Did our faculty and university bill and collect from the patients that had insurance or just paid cash? And so there's this correspondence which I haven't read, but I see it summarized in one of the manuscripts, between Flexner and McLean. Now, McLean was original faculty in internal medicine. He's a physiologist. And they went back and forth. Flexner was worried that private patients would get preferential treatment, and McLean's response that they were salaried. So we probably were the first salaried physicians in the United States, meaning there was no incentive for private or non-private patients. And it ended badly, actually. Flexner got mad. I think he withdrew all his support, because he thought we shouldn't be even collecting from private patients or cash. And then there was another controversy in the 30s. This is what Howard Hatcher's words, that we were giving cut rate care and we were communists, practicing equally for all patients, whether they paid or not. And even the Medical Practice Act, the Illinois Medical Practice, the Chicago Medical Society tried to get rid of Dallas Femister because he wasn't accepting fees for patients. He was giving it for free. So we'll come to Dallas Femister. Now, Dallas Femister is everyone's favorite. He's Dr. Hatchard's favorite, Dr. Compier's favorite. Everyone really thought a lot about him, and even the people in this institution, and the internists and all that, really admired him. He came from private practice from Rush and came here as first full-time salaried surgeon. Now, it so happens that Dallas Femister liked bone tumors. So we have lots of names about bone tumors, you know, from Mr. Bone Graft, core this, episodesis, and people used his name deliberately. Actually, he actually did lots of surgery. He operated on the chest. He operated on the abdomen. He did Bill Roth this and Ruin Y that, whatever those were that I had to memorize a long time ago. And I still can't remember them. And he even did parathyroid surgery. He did it for secondary hyperparathyroidism. So the guy was sort of I'm saying he probably was a master surgeon for the time. And so he was really, so he recruited the first faculty of surgery. Remember, these are all just surgeons with no differentiation. Oh, I forgot to tell you. So he did the first surgical procedure, okay, at the University of Chicago, and it was a resection elbow arthroplasty for trauma, residuals of trauma. So either the guy had, because we don't know, horrible, you know, distal humerus or montasia. He probably had the elbow didn't work. And we can't really figure it out, but this is some sort of follow-up. This is the elbow, this is the hand. There must have been a multiple exposures. So the first surgical procedure here was an orthopedic procedure. So let me just backstep here. Why were these guys, and they were primarily guys, all doing pathology? Because in the United States, pathology was done by surgeons, surgical pathology. Okay, whereas internists were usually physiology type people. And so for a while, until the 50s, all surgical path here and in most places was done by surgeons, and they ran their own path labs, as we did, and ENT did, and urology did, and everywhere else until the 50s. Okay, and then it became part of pathology. So here's the original faculty. Two of them are in this room. That's Femister, okay, and that's Dragston. Okay, so I didn't put these up there. They just happen to be here. Okay. And the next one is Huggins. I put him in sort of order of, well, Hopkins should go first. He's a Nobel laureate. He discovered the relationship of hormones to prostate cancer. I think his original Nobel Prize display, sort of little cutouts, is up here in the end corridor somewhere. It looks like what I saw in grade school. Okay? And then there was Percival Bailey. He was a neurosurgeon. And he wanted, he had neurologists and neurosurgeons, and he wanted to form a neural institute, neurology, neurosurgery arts. So this is not a new deal, right? This is what people thought about, but ultimately neurology did not, left the institute that he had formed, and he left and became the chair of neurosurgery at University of Illinois. Here's Ed Compier. He probably is the closest to being the first orthopedic surgeon at the University of Chicago. There's somebody in between, but he lasted like 6 months. And these three people, I have no idea what they did. Okay, so there's some other famous relationships. So here's Marshall Urist. Okay, so you know, he's thought to be the discoverer of BMP. He was here in the 30s as mostly a physiologist. He was not accepted into the orthopedic program. Here's McLean. He was relieved of his responsibilities, don't know why, as the chair of medicine. And so they wrote this book. And the title is, of course, you know, The Introduction of Physiology of the Skeletal System. So those were two prominent people. I'm going to go back one to Henry Mankin. He was an intern here, I think, in about 1955. And Dr. Hatcher didn't think he should come here either. He told me, oh, you know, I think I forgot about this. Who is that biochemist that was, you know, I should have never picked this other guy. So, so Mankin really was here also. So here, that's sort of the Twin Towers. This is Ed Compier. Okay, and there's Howard Hatcher. Now, Ed Compier, he's got a medal on him. I think he was in the late 30s the president of the Academy. Now, the Academy and the board were created in 1933. So he was an early leader in orthopedics, and this medal, I think, is American Academy of Orthopedic Surgery. And there's Howard Hatcher. So Compier, as I told you, had a large number of publications. He was a very active surgeon. He left because he wasn't promoted. And he went to Northwestern. And he replaced, I think it was Magnuson, from Magnuson and Stack. And there were a lot of reasons. One was money. One was he was not promoted to a full professor. Sounds familiar, right? Money and not promoted, right? The two, okay, not much different. He had a national reputation, or he wouldn't have been Academy. He had a charismatic, and he was an empire builder, according to Howard Hatcher. Now you can, you know, I don't think he said it in a complimentary way, but he was. Okay, and so he became chair at Northwestern. So our first orthopedic surgeon here became chair in town. Sounds familiar? Okay, so this guy, he's very quiet. He was a master educator. He did less surgery. He definitely was underpaid. In fact, the residents had to buy him a car. They bought him his first car in the early 50s. It was too pitiful for them. That's what Anakin told me. Okay, he was beloved by the residents. And after a while, he actually became the inaugural chair at Stanford. So that's, well, you know, some of this stuff is, I wish I'd taped it, but I did not. Okay, so we're going to hear, so put your pulse down.
Are you interested in going to surgical grand rounds, or the first part of it from 5 to 6? They've got a fibrochondrosarcoma on the schedule, which plastic surgery is presenting apparently a buttocks tumor.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to
Are you
go.
interested in going to that? You want to?
Provided I don't have to make any comment or anything.
All right.
Okay.
You better hide them in the back, because they'll catch them otherwise.
Well, would you mind if we introduced you and
Yeah, don't.
don't introduce you?
No, because
Because then I want
anybody
you to
whom
say
I
something.
know will recognize me. Anybody whom I don't know wouldn't care a damn.
All right.
You know, there's nothing worse for young people than to have old people brought around. It's impossible.
No, I don't agree with that.
Unless they have some connection.
Maybe.
And the older you get, the more you ramble. And that's inevitable.
You still teach residents every day, don't you, Dr. Hunter? 4 days a week in the afternoon?
I don't teach them. I give them the opportunity to look and see.
Well, what your approach is, as I understand it, is you give them the slides and you just let them look at it.
Yeah, let them look at it and then tell me what they see.
So the slide starts to talk to them.
Yeah, that's right.
It seems to me I heard that terminology.
Well, that's the only way they ever remember anything, having worked it out themselves. You can put pretty picture slides up on the wall, but to anybody who doesn't know that particular patient or anything, they're meaningless. And they'll admire the colors, but they'll remember nothing.
Okay, so, you know, for me, it would have been maddening. I mean, I was slow, and this was, you know, so I would have had to say something, so. So he used, meaning Hatcher, a lot of x-rays and gross pathology and these large sections as a foundation for teaching orthopedic knowledge, not just tumors, okay? As a matter of fact, most of the stuff they had was not tumors, okay? It was infections and trauma. Okay, so I'm just going to spend the remaining time on two notable residents at the University of Chicago. One's Mary Sherman. Stutz is her maiden name. She was married by the time she went to medical school. Her husband was in medical school, I think became a dermatologist and then committed suicide later. And there's Bill Anakin. Now, many of you, Miguel will know who that is. It sort of looks like him, right? So this is Mary's middle name, but she always went by Sherman, and Bill Anakin, or William Anakin, or Kingfisher. That was what he puts on his email. So here's Mary Sherman. So she was born in Evanston. Her father was a professor of music, and her mother was an accomplished vocalist. And she was very bright. This is a picture outside the wall. Every time I go in there, you can look at it, 1941. So Mary Sherman is there, okay? She was first in her class. Of course, there are 3 women in the class. Then there's Howard Hatcher. He often wore granny glasses at that time. So they're both sort of in the same picture. So most of the boys went off to war, and Mary and Howard Hatcher took care of most of the patients, a lot of polio at that time. There were polio epidemics. So here's a picture in 1951. There is Mary Sherman. Okay, so the crazy thing is that she got murdered in New Orleans in 1964. And most of her accomplishments are unrecognized. Okay, so she was the first woman to receive the Kappa Delta Award. Okay, she is the first woman surgical faculty here at the University of Chicago. That's all of surgery. She's either the second or the third woman orthopedic surgeon in the United States that was board certified. She's associate editor for the journal. And she left because she was denied tenure. Then the other person that's pretty well known, very well known, is Bill Anakin. Now, he had 4 kappa deltas. That's a lot of kappa deltas. Nobody's had 4. No scientist or nobody. He's also published in 8 different decades. Count them, starting in the 40s. 49 was first. I saw a CV. Of course, it was totally inaccurate because he didn't care. And of course, he was the chair at Florida and the president of the board and the AOA and RCs. So there's a few little anecdotes. Okay. First of all, the first time I got in the room with him alone as a fellow, was we were doing a biopsy of a strike zone or osteosarcoma. At that time, we did amputation immediately. That was it. It's the standard of care. So I look at the slide, and he says, "What do you see?" I said, "Oh, that's an osteosarcoma." I said, "Well, how much insurance do you have?" I said, "I haven't a clue, because I'm a fellow, and paid off an NIH grant." So, of course, what he had done is he switched slides on me. He had taken someone else's slide and put it under there. So from now on, I never trusted any slides I got in the mail. I never really was sure the slides matched the patient. So my job was to get all the consults. He got about 3 a week. What's this? What's that? And I would tee him up, and he would teach me by that method. I guess it's sort of public humiliation, right? But I was strong enough, and he liked teaching a lot. So let's go back. Okay, so here's the 2 slides that we started with. This is the one that I thought was correct, and this is the greater number. There's 47 of them on there. Anything in orange, I didn't know what happened to them, so we tried to do some investigating, and we didn't get very far, but a few people, and so this is the outcome. So we had to make a decision. Who counts as a resident? Because especially in the 30s and 40s, you couldn't quite tell. And so we decided to only list those that had 2 years with them. So we eliminated 2 pretty famous people. One is McMaster, who went to, I think, UC Irvine, started a program there, and the other was Relton McCarroll, who was at WashU as a professor. So we had to go somewhere with this. And so our numerator is John Fahey. He became a professor in the Northwestern system, actually in Evanston, and the North American Traveling Fellowship he endowed originally. Siegling is inaugural chair at South Carolina. Sam Banks was a chair, a professor at Tufts. Crawford Campbell was a chair at Albany, and then he went in his later years to Harvard. Mike Bonfilli was a chair, was not a chair, a professor at Iowa. Mary Sherman was a professor at Tulane until she was murdered. This guy never counted, never knew of him, but he stayed on the faculty here for a few years and was an associate professor, so I had to count him. Jim Miles is graduated in 1946. He started the program at the University of Colorado, so he's inaugural chair. Gene Mendel is probably the only person alive on this slide. He's close to 100. He's at University of Buffalo as inaugural chair. Tom Brower started the program at Kentucky. Bill Anakin we talked about. Wayne Akison was near the end of the 80s, 58, and he started at UCSD. He recently died. Howard Hatcher, well, I had to count him as a section chief and as an inaugural chair because he really was a resident here. He really wasn't. And Robert Moore became a professor and the chair after Hatcher. And this guy is sort of the last because Howard Hatcher leaves in 1960. So here's what we have. So we have 31 people that have been here for 2 years at minimum. Actually, Anakin was here for 5 years. Some people are here for 4 or 5 years. And these, so the numerator is 16 academic surgeons for 31 residents, and 9 of them became chairs. So that's the summary, and come next year, we'll fill out the rest. Thanks.